I didn't move into the building because I liked it. I moved in because it was cheap. The ad said, "Cozy City Studio, low rent, downtown access." What it didn't say was that the place smelled faintly of mildew, the wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the radiator groaned like a dying animal every night. Still, at $450 a month, I couldn't complain. I carried my boxes up the narrow stairwell, the kind where the walls feel too close, and the lights flicker no matter how many times you screw in a new bulb. My new home was on the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. The first thing I noticed when I opened the door wasn't the dust or the chipped tiles. It was the window, or rather, what was outside the window. From my 3rd floor view, I should have seen the neighboring street and rooftops, the glow of neon signs and traffic below. Instead, all I saw was a patch of forest, dense, dark, stretching out further than the city should have allowed. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, opened the window. Still trees, black pines swaying, branches scratching against each other in the wind. That was impossible. The apartment listing had shown a photo of the view, and it was a normal street. That night I told myself it was exhaustion, moving stress. But when I turned off the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching. Every so often, a shadow moved against the tree line, not quite human, not quite animal. And then came the whisper. At first it was so faint I thought it was the pipes. But the radiator hissed in bursts, while this was continuous. A low murmur, like several voices at once, speaking just beyond the glass. I didn't sleep much. On the second night, I woke up at 3:11 a.m. exactly. The room was freezing, my breath visible in the air. I turned my head toward the window. Something stood there, tall, impossibly thin, pressed against the glass, with its face level to mine. Only it wasn't a face, just smooth, pale skin stretched tight over bone, with a gaping hole where the mouth should have been. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My body was pinned down, my chest heavy, my limbs useless. The figure leaned closer, the whole of its mouth opening wider, and that whisper filled the room again. But now it was inside my head. Words I didn't understand, syllables that made my teeth ache and my eyes water. When I finally jolted awake, the thing was gone. The window was empty. But there was something new. On the wall beside the radiator, drawn in what looked like ash, was a crude symbol, a circle with jagged lines inside it, and my door, which I had locked, was standing wide open. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. I went down to the mailboxes, hoping to bump into someone, anyone, who lived in the building. The place was too quiet, though. The halls smelled faintly of bleach and something sweeter, almost metallic, like rust. That's when I saw her. A woman, maybe in her mid-40s, was slipping a letter into her mailbox. She had wiry black hair tied into a bun, and she wore a sweater far too heavy for the season. She looked at me the way people look at a sudden noise, startled, cautious, ready to bolt. "You're new?" she said flatly. I nodded. "Yeah, just moved into 3B. Her face went pale. "3B? "Yes, why?" She licked her lips, then shook her head. "You should leave, tonight if you can." I laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline, but her eyes never softened. "Why would I do that?" I asked. "Because it likes the ones in 3B, she whispered. "It's always 3B. I frowned. "It?" She didn't answer. She just turned, hurried down the hall, and shut her apartment door with a snap of the lock. I stood there in the silence, my pulse loud in my ears. That night, I left the light on. Didn't matter. At 3:11 a.m., I woke again. The whisper was louder now, threading through the radiator hiss, the hum of the fridge, even the pounding of my heart. I turned my head slowly. The thing was back. This time, it wasn't at the window. It was inside, pressed into the far corner of my apartment, taller than the ceiling should have allowed, its limbs bent at wrong angles, its faceless head tilted, listening. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked tight. It began to move, its body sliding against itself like shadow peeled off a wall. Step by step, it drew closer, the hole where its mouth should be opened, stretching wider until it reached its chest. A sound like flies swarming filled my skull. I was frozen. All I could do was watch it crawl toward me until suddenly the thing stopped. Its head snapped toward the radiator, and then, as if yanked by invisible strings, it collapsed in on itself, folding smaller and smaller until it slipped through the wall like smoke. The only thing left behind was the ash symbol, darker now, thick as if freshly drawn. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed to the neighbor's apartment the next morning, pounding until she finally cracked the door. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded. My throat felt dry. "What the hell is it?" She glanced behind her, then pulled me inside. Her apartment was nothing like mine. Heavy curtains covered the windows, candles burned in glass jars, and dozens of symbols, the same one I'd seen on my wall, were painted across the plaster. "You need to understand something," she said. "That building shouldn't exist. The city tried to tear it down years ago, but every time they did, something stopped them. Accidents, fires, workers going missing. Eventually they just left it." I swallowed hard. "And the thing?" Her eyes darted toward the window as though even speaking about it could summon it. "It's older than the city, older than anything we have a name for. It waits, it whispers, and when it chooses someone, it doesn't let go." I wanted to laugh, call her insane, but I'd seen it. "So why symbols?" I asked, pointing at the walls. "They don't stop it," she admitted. "They just slow it down, delay the inevitable." I shivered. "And why me? Why 3B? Her face tightened. "Because that's where it starts." That night, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I sat on the floor, staring at the radiator, clutching a kitchen knife like it could protect me from something that wasn't even flesh. At 3:11 a.m., the whisper began. The lights flickered, dimmed, then went out entirely. The window slid open on its own, and from outside, the forest rustled. I could see it again, the endless stretch of black pines shifting in the windless dark. And then a voice, clear this time. "Come." Not in my head, not a whisper, a command, deep guttural, vibrating through the bones of the building. I staggered back, knife shaking in my grip. The forest didn't belong outside that window. It couldn't. But the more I stared, the more real it looked, until the city lights, the traffic sounds, everything I should have seen was gone. Just trees, waiting, and in their shadows, a figure moved. Not the tall, faceless one from my room, something worse, something with horns. The next day I skipped work. I didn't even call in. My head was a fog of exhaustion, paranoia, and a growing fear that nothing around me was real anymore. I walked through the city streets like a ghost. Nobody noticed me. Nobody looked up. The city felt wrong, too quiet, too muted, like a film with the sound dialed down. When I got back to the building, a folded piece of paper was slipped under my door. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It wasn't written in ink. It was burned. The letters were blackened scars across the page, curling at the edges as though the paper had survived a fire. "Come to the trees, midnight." That was it. No signature, no explanation. The paper smelled faintly of rot. I ran to the neighbor's apartment, banging on her door. She didn't answer. The lock had been broken. I pushed inside. The apartment was empty, the curtains ripped down, candles overturned. The walls where her protective symbols had been painted were scoured clean, as though something had scraped them away with claws. On the floor, in the center of the room, was a single object, a wooden mask, crude, cracked, shaped like a face that had been stretched too wide. The eyes were empty holes, the mouth was a jagged grin, carved too deep, lined with something black that still looked wet. The moment I touched it, my vision collapsed. I wasn't in the apartment anymore, I was in the forest. The trees stretched endlessly in all directions, their bark oozing with a black sap that smelled of iron and ash. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me like water. And they were all there, figures between the trees, tall, thin, faceless. Hundreds of them swaying gently, heads tilting in unison as if listening to the same sound. The mask pulsed in my hand like a beating heart. And then I heard it again, that same guttural voice. "Come." I staggered back, ripping the mask away from my face. I was back in the apartment, gasping, sweating, my lungs burning like I'd drowned. The mask sat on the floor, still, silent. But I knew what it was, an invitation. That night I tried everything. I locked the windows. I barricaded the door. I even took the batteries out of the smoke detector, thinking maybe the whisper came through frequencies I couldn't hear. None of it mattered. At midnight, the paper caught fire on its own, curling into ash in my kitchen sink. The mask, which I'd left in the neighbor's apartment, was suddenly sitting on my table, and the window. The window no longer showed the city, only trees. The forest was waiting. I don't know why I did it. I think part of me knew I didn't have a choice. I picked up the mask. It felt hot, almost burning, but I couldn't let go. The window slid open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of earth and rot. And then, without climbing, without moving, I was through. 1 second I was in my apartment. The next, I was standing barefoot on pine needles, the city gone behind me. The forest had swallowed me whole. At first I thought I was alone, but then the whisper started. Not from one voice, but from hundreds, thousands. The faceless figures stood in perfect lines between the trees, their whispers merging into a low, endless drone that filled the air like static. I clutched the mask tight, my only anchor, and then the trees parted. Something emerged. It was taller than the rest. Its horns scraped the branches above. Its body was a black mass, shifting, crawling, never still. Where its face should have been was nothing but a hole, wide and deep, a tunnel into infinite dark. It raised a hand, and the whispers stopped. Silence. And then it spoke. "You are mine now." The words didn't enter my ears. They drilled straight into my bones. My knees buckled. The mask slipped from my fingers, landing face up on the forest floor. The figure bent low, its shadow spilling across me like tar. And I realized something with a horror so sharp it felt like a blade through my skull. This wasn't the first time it had chosen someone, and it wouldn't be the last. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just obeyed. My feet carried me deeper into the forest, crunching through pine needles and brittle twigs. The figure with the hollow face drifted behind me, its shadow stretching ahead like a leash. Everywhere I looked, the faceless thing stood between the trees, motionless, watching, without eyes. I tried to speak, to scream, but my voice was gone. My throat felt raw, torn, as though something had been ripped out of me. I walked until the trees opened into a clearing. In the center stood a wooden structure, half collapsed, like the frame of a house, that had never been finished. The beams were dark with something thicker than sap. At first, I thought it was a gallows. Then I realized it was worse. It was an altar, and scattered around its base were bones, human bones, dozens of them, skulls cracked wide, rib cages torn open, fingers curled into claws of stone. The mask lay at the center, though I hadn't brought it. It was waiting there, mouth grinning too wide, wet with something fresh. The hollow-faced figure raised its hand again. The faceless crowd began to move, slowly. Swaying like reeds in wind, they stepped forward, surrounding me, closing in. The whisper returned, not from them, not from the thing behind me, but from inside me. Put it on. I shook my head. My whole body trembled. Every instinct screamed that the mask wasn't a shield. It was a cage. Once I wore it, there'd be nothing left of me. Put it on. The faceless things leaned closer, their heads tilted in jerks, like broken marionettes. The air grew thicker. My chest burned as if I'd swallowed smoke. I dropped to my knees, clutching my skull. The voice grew louder. Put it on. And I did. The mask seared against my skin. Fire raced across my face, my eyes, my teeth. For a second I couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't think. And then everything was clear. The forest wasn't endless. It was alive. The trees weren't wood, but bone. Their branches were arms. Their roots were veins, pulsing, twitching, carrying black blood deep into the soil. The faceless crowd wasn't watching me. They were feeding me, pouring themselves into me, memory after memory, a flood of screams, deaths, rituals. I saw 1,000 others before me, dragged into this place, given the mask, hollowed out until nothing human remained. And I saw what I was becoming. My skin split, peeling like bark, my bones stretched, bending wrong. My mouth tore wider and wider until it matched the mask's grin. The hollow-faced figure leaned close, the void where its face should be opened wider, swallowing everything, the trees, the sky, the faceless, until only me and it remained. And then I understood the truth. It wasn't a god, it wasn't a demon, it was the forest itself. And I was its next seed. When I woke, I was back in my apartment. For a moment I thought it had been a dream. The mask was gone. The window showed the city again. My phone buzzed with missed calls from work. But the silence was wrong, the air too still. And when I looked down, pine needles clung to my feet. Days have passed, or maybe weeks. I don't know anymore. Time moves differently now. Sometimes the city looks normal. Sometimes, when I blink, the walls peel back, and I see the trees pressing in, closer every time. At night I hear footsteps in the hallway, neighbors crying, scratches against my door. I don't answer, because I know what I'll see. Their faces will be gone. Their voices will be mine. I can feel it happening. The mask isn't on my face, but it doesn't need to be. It's inside me now. When I pass by mirrors, my reflection lags a second behind. When I try to smile, my lips tear wider than they should. And sometimes, when I look out the window, the city is gone entirely. Only the forest remains, waiting, growing. Last night I finally understood. I wasn't invited. I was chosen. The forest doesn't let go. It spreads, it seeps, it waits inside me, patient and hungry, until the moment it decides I'm ready. And when that moment comes, you'll hear the whisper too. Put it on.